Hey Dragons, and welcome to this instructional video for Lesson 13, Part 2, State Legislatures. The main idea behind this civics lesson is state governments are organized into executive, legislative, and judicial branches with powers similar to those of the federal government. Each branch acts as a check on the other two branches of state government. In addition, citizens have a great deal of influence on state lawmaking. With that in mind, by the end of watching this video, you'll be able to explain how the role of state legislatures has changed during our nation's history, describe how state legislatures are organized, summarize the powers of state legislatures, identify ways in which citizens can influence state government, and explain how state governments are financed. Now that the outcomes for this lesson have been shared with you, let's get started. Because state legislators usually get less news coverage than members of Congress do, you might be less aware of the activities of lawmakers in the state. However, state legislators make most of the laws that affect your day-to-day life. For much of the first 100 years of our nation's history, the states were mostly rural with small populations. The demands on state governments were not great. Legislators were citizens who would leave their jobs for a few weeks each year to go to legislative sessions. Most of these citizen legislators had jobs as farmers, lawyers, or business people. Over time, however, the job of a state legislator grew more complex. The rapid growth of industries and cities led to new responsibilities for state government. As legislatures met more often and for longer sessions, citizen legislators found it difficult to balance their government duties with the demands of their jobs. Today, many state legislators are full-time lawmakers. The typical legislator has studied political science, law, or public administration, and has spent some time in government service before running for office. Often, state legislators plan on a lifelong career in politics. Whether they serve full-time or part-time, state legislators have to meet certain qualifications. In most states, legislators must be United States citizens and live in the state and district they represent. Most states set the minimum age for representatives at 21 and for senators at 25. Some states have lowered these ages to 18 and 21. In most states, senators serve 4-year terms, while representatives serve 2-year terms. All states except Nebraska have a bicameral or two-house legislature, with the upper house called the Senate. The lower house is usually known as the House of Representatives, although in some states the lower house is called the Assembly, General Assembly, or House of Delegates. As with Congress, the upper house of state legislatures is smaller than the lower house. However, in the lower house, the proportion of representatives to the state's population varies widely. For example, the lower house in New Hampshire has 400 members to serve a population of about 1.4 million people, while California has 80 members to represent more than 39 million. State governments, like national government, divide legislative terms into sessions. Most states hold annual sessions, while a few meet every other year. The majority of states limit the length of their sessions, anything from 20 days to 6 months. However, the governor may call special sessions to handle urgent business. Seats in state legislatures are apportioned or divided among districts on the basis of equal representation. That is, state legislators represent districts that are roughly equal in population. Apportionment was not always determined according to equal representation. Seats in upper houses used to be apportioned on a geographical basis, like the United States Senate. Apportionment of many lower houses was also geographical. As a result, one legislator might have represented a rural district with a few hundred people, while another represented all the people in a large city. The United States Supreme Court set up the present system of apportionment in the case of Reynolds v. Sims from 1964. Pointing out that legislators could represent people, not trees or acres, The court ruled that the apportionment of both houses of state legislatures must be based on population. Today, most states reapportion seats in their legislatures every 10 years, based on the results of the United States Census. The main job of a state legislature is to make laws. By and large, the process is the same as in Congress. Bills are introduced, discussed in committees, and debated on the floor. Both houses must agree on the final bill, which the governor must then approve. A major difference between lawmaking in Congress and in state legislatures is that in some states, citizens have a greater voice in the laws that are made. At the turn of the century, reformers known as progressives saw that powerful interest groups were having too much influence over state legislatures. The progressives wanted to return the government to the people. One of the progressives' ideas for giving lawmaking power to citizens is called the initiative, the process by which citizens can propose laws. In this process, which is similar to the constitutional initiative, citizens gather signatures on a petition. When enough people have signed the petition, usually 5 to 10% of the registered voters, the proposed law is put to a vote in a statewide election. If a majority of the voters approve of the proposal, it becomes state law. The initiative is now permitted in 21 states. Another way that citizens in some states participate in lawmaking is the referendum, the process by which a law proposed or passed by the state legislature is referred to the voters to approve or reject. Almost every state requires a referendum on constitutional amendments proposed by the legislature. Both the initiative and referendum are ways that citizens can take lawmaking into their own hands. If enough people believe that a certain law is needed, or that a bad law should be removed, they can use the initiative or referendum. Citizens in a number of states also have the power of recall, a process for removing elected officials from office. A recall effort is usually begun by a group of citizens who believe that an official is not doing a good job. They may think the official is dishonest, or they may simply disagree with his or her policies. Citizens begin a recall by gathering voters' signatures on a petition. If, in the recall election that follows, a majority of voters agree with the recall, the official must leave office. The recall, like the initiative and the referendum, is an important way that citizens can directly influence state government. In keeping with the principle of checks and balances, state legislatures have the power to oversee or to check the activities of the executive and judicial branches. In many states, the legislature must approve officials and judges who are appointed by the chief executive, the governor. State legislatures must also approve the governor's budget. In this process, the legislature examines how well executive agencies, the departments, committees, boards, and offices that carry out the work of the executive branch, are doing their jobs. State legislators also review how federal funds are spent in their state. Legislatures in most states have the power to impeach or bring charges against executive and judicial officers and to determine their guilt or innocence. By and large, the impeachment process in the states is much the same as the process that is followed in Congress. State governments need money to meet the needs of citizens for such services as education, highways, health care, and environmental protection. Where does this money come from? States raise more than 50% of their revenue or income from taxes. Most of state tax revenue comes from two sources: sales taxes and income taxes. Most states have two kinds of sales taxes, or charges made on purchases of goods and services. The general sales tax places a charge on almost all goods sold in the state. This charge usually is a percentage of the price of a product. For example, if you buy a $15 book in a state with a 6% sales tax, you will have to pay a tax of 6% of $15, or 90 cents. Therefore, you will pay a total of $15.90 for the book. A second kind of sales tax is the excise tax, a charge on certain goods such as alcoholic beverages, gasoline, and tobacco. Most states also have an income tax, a tax on what individuals and businesses earn. The income tax is a percentage of the money a person or business makes. Other types of taxes also help states raise the money they need. For example, lumber and mining companies often must pay what is known as a severance tax on the timber, coal, gas, and oil they take from the land. All states also levy one or more of the taxes known as user fees. Charges for driver's licenses and fees for fishing and hunting permits are examples of such fees. States choose which taxes they wish to use. Montana, for example, has no sales tax, while Texas has no income tax. Alaska, a state rich in natural resources, relies heavily on severance taxes. Over time, state and local governments have increasingly turned to Congress for money. Federal money comes to the states in several forms. Two of the most widely used forms are categorical grants and block grants. Categorical grants are given for specific purposes, such as a job training program or highway construction. These grants come with strings attached, certain conditions that must be met before the state may use the funds. In 1999, for example, many members of Congress wanted all 50 states to set a tough national standard for determining when a driver is legally drunk. To pressure the states into going along with their plan, supporters introduced bills in the House and Senate that would withhold millions of dollars of federal highway funds from states that did not adopt the tough new standards. Block grants, on the other hand, are given for more general purposes. While a categorical grant may be used for a specific program such as health care for the homeless, a block grant may cover a broad area such as health care in general. The state can then decide which programs to use the block grant funds for. Many advocates of states' rights support block grants because they give governors and state legislatures more control over how money is spent in their state. In 1996, Congress passed major welfare reform legislation, which was signed into law by President Clinton. One of the main provisions of this law was to convert the federal money sent to states for welfare programs from categorical grants to block grants. These block grants gave states more freedom to design their own welfare programs. Sometimes states borrow money by selling bonds, certificates that people buy from the government. The government agrees to pay back the cost of the bond plus interest after a set period of time. States often use this method of raising revenue for such projects as building a school or a convention center. Some states also raise money through lotteries. About 60% of the money from lottery ticket sales goes toward prizes. The remaining 40% goes to the state, often to help pay for educational programs. States with lotteries hope that the income they produce will fill the gap between tax revenues and the cost of state programs. However, even though you may hear about people winning multi-million-dollar prizes, lotteries have not fulfilled the state's dreams. No state receives more than 5% of its total revenue from a lottery. Further, some critics complain that any form of gambling is wrong, and the state should not encourage it. Others argue that the majority of lottery players are the people who can least afford to gamble, the poor. So that's the way it is with Lesson 13, Part 2, State Legislatures. At this point, you should know that the responsibilities of legislators changed as legislatures changed from part-time to full-time sessions. State Senate and state representative districts are determined by population. The initiative, referenda, and recall processes give power to the people of a state, and state governments are financed through both taxation and federal funds. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to have the entire catalog of civics videos available at your fingertips. Click the subscribe button and then click the follow bell to receive notifications as to when the channel is updated. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in class, Dragons.